Dem. We're joined by Congressman Boyle of Pennsylvania, who just voted no on the Trade Promotion Authority, which just passed in the House, and coming to us live from Orlando, former Congressman Jim Baucus, a Florida Democrat who feels very strongly that this is a trade bill that should pass. We begin with Representative Boyle. You just voted no on the TPA. Why?
Well, there are several reasons. More than anything else, I don't like the fact that I just got elected to this body 5.5 months ago, and now I've just completely, or this body has completely taken itself out of the game. We now have no ability to amend what the final deal will be whatsoever. We really haven't been a part of this process other than having to beg and claw my way to get into a bunker to actually read the agreement, which of course is not yet finalized. We haven't been a part of this at all, and now we will have an up or down vote, that's true, but with no ability to amend on labor provisions, environmental provisions, important other considerations, the ISDS, which I hope we'll get a chance to talk about, which actually jeopardizes the sovereignty of the United States, and I think both conservatives and progressives should be concerned about. So I'm not anti-trade. I recognize that we are 4 to 5% of the world's population and that we need to do trade internationally. I just believe it's about time that these agreements are better and actually weighted toward the American middle class, which in my view, this is not.
Congressman Baucus, he makes a very good point here, and that is that maybe some Democrats and maybe even some Republicans feel they've lost a little bit of control to at least tweak some of these bills that come through. What do you say about this? Why should this TPA be passed all the way through the Senate?
Well, first of all, I'd like to congratulate Congressman on his recent election. My daughter's a recent graduate of Bryn Mawr College, so I'm familiar with his district. I followed his campaign, and I'm confident we agree on many things, but not this. My own view is that any president of any party needs trade negotiating authority, and especially now. Also, in addition to being a former member of Congress, before that, I was a trade negotiator for the United States, so I know the truth of what the president's saying. The leader of my party in the House, Nancy Pelosi, my friend, and my other former colleagues there, say they want the president to get the best possible trade deal he can. The only way for him to get that is if he goes first to the negotiating table with negotiating authority such as he's asking for. Otherwise, other parties to the negotiations will simply not give us their best deal. They're not going to give us their best deal if they think that Congress is going to second-guess it. This is why Congress invented fast-track authority back in the 1970s. It wasn't invented by any president. It was invented by the Congress.
We want to bring in Charlie Gasparino and Charles Payne, our Fox Business contributors here. Charles Payne, you know, Brendan Boyle from Pennsylvania has a good point in that he's a little concerned about losing control, but some of the other Democrats are more worried that these kinds of trade bills tend to see some job losses come with them. Okay, right. It's almost like a fact of life here. Do you get a sense that maybe the TAA should have lived just to at least smooth the rough edges of what will eventually be a trade bill where we do see some job losses?
Well, the TAA was interesting because it actually let some benefits expire for workers who typically the Democrats would be for. A big job program that supposedly will give people money because their jobs were displaced by trade. Now, having said that, the fact that they let that die and they had to do these separately was pretty interesting. But for me, my biggest worry was the opaqueness of it. The Congressman talked about going into a bunker. Got to read it in something of a safe room, and that's the scary part. I'm for trade, but I'm for fair trade, and that's what I think Donald Trump has hit a nerve with, because think about this year. I think 5 auto plants have been announced in Mexico, including that $2.5 billion one that Donald Trump talks about, and 1 in America.
So are you hearing this, Representative Boyle? Charles Payne actually is agreeing with you that he feels that it hasn't been fair that you guys are in a bunker, you're not allowed to read, or you haven't been given that opportunity.
Yeah, well, and that's frankly the way I feel. And I also think that the added secrecy has only, frankly, increased the amount of concern that there is nationwide, and it plays into the perception that most ordinary people have that they're disaffected with their government and just not connected to it. So I think the way this has been handled has inadvertently helped add to that.
Charlie Gasparino, you know, this is a touchy situation, but it is rare to see Democrats battling Democrats on an issue like this and Republicans siding with the president.
I mean, what makes this fascinating to me is not the market impact, because it has no market impact, obviously. I think the economic impact is going to be sort of muted. What kind of gets me on this story is that, you know, in the old days, the Democrats used to be a party of free trade, believe it or not, and not so old days, like 1996, 97, 98. Now it's not the party of free trade anymore. And I don't consider this bill free trade to begin with because it's so watered down, so many amendments, so much stuff is involved here. But, you know, if you look at where the Democratic Party is going, free trade, which was one of the planks of the New Democrats from Bill Clinton, is now done.
Congressman Baucus, is Charlie right that the economic impact of this particular bill would be muted? I get the sense that the big push is that it will give access of our goods that are made here to the world, to at least 11 other nations, many of them in Asia.
This particular bill is simply a bill that provides negotiating authority to the president.
Right, but the final bill.
We have yet to see what will be negotiated. One thing that might be negotiated would be a trans-Pacific partnership that could cover about 40% of the global economy. We don't know what will be in the final agreement. Following that, we would, as the president has proposed, have a transatlantic trade and investment partnership between the United States and Europe that would cover literally trillions of dollars of commerce worldwide.
Congressman Baucus, what happened to the New Democrats? Where are they on fundamental economic issues? They're done. I mean, they're not part. It's like, you know, we're talking about Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren. You know, this is what the other gentleman's basically channeling Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders. That's what they say. I mean, I find it fascinating that the center left is no longer part of the Democratic coalition anymore. It's the left and the left.
Well, if the center isn't part of the Democratic Party, then the Democratic Party is not going to be a majority party, and it's not going to be true to Democratic principles. There are a lot of things on which the Congressman and I would agree in terms of investments in education, infrastructure, and more, but they won't succeed if we close our doors to legitimate competition in the world economy. 95% of our potential customers are outside the United States.
Congressman Boyle, before we finish, would you call yourself a centrist Democrat?
Yeah, no, I was laughing or kind of ironic the last comments because
we laugh at Charlie all the time.
And I'm a fan actually of Mr. Gasparino's and have watched him for many years. And he might find it ironic that at this time last year I was running for a seat in which I was being attacked as not liberal enough. So I won't hope to play the tape of Mr. Gasparino saying I'm like Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders. I think some people will appreciate that.
They play
I will say, let's be careful not to allow one issue to suddenly be extrapolated to cover the whole political spectrum.
All right. This is a great conversation.